G'day friends and fans, welcome to Dave Talks Stuff, Ukraine War Update for the 30th of November 2025. We have good news, but before we get to the good news, we shall look at the war update. Now, for the second or third day in a row? Third day, well, most of this week, Kyiv has been hit by drones, sometimes missiles. Most of the missile strikes, however, the bigger missile strikes, have been elsewhere. But so far we've only got a few bombs and drone strikes elsewhere in Ukraine. And we only have attacks, as you can see again on the centre, not even near the airport, though this out here in Boyaka, let's see where we're at. Doesn't seem it's near what appears to be a set of important buildings, say marked out in yellow. So now, as we go through the map, assuming mostly gets a reprieve, a little bit of fighting in the buffer zone. So with Kharkiv, a bit of a reprieve, only some drone strikes on Ukrainian positions at the border. Some fighting here with no result. Fighting north of Kupiansk with no result. And fighting in the Kupiansk region with Krasnovargia being struck by, was it artillery or glide bombs? Airstrikes. It's not the only one. There are multiple airstrikes throughout Ukraine today along the front lines. Though north of Lyman, fighting without Russians making any advances, nor was there any progress in Seversk or Chavashya. Now, in Koskovoikia, a little bit of activity and a little bit of movement. A few spikes here and there, but nothing significant. Same with Marionad. A little bit of spiking here and there, but nothing significant. Though it is, the Russians have made progress here. And they've narrowed the gap here. The assault teams have not been able to establish a foothold in Marionad. And operations to round up the Ukrainians continues in Seversk, clearing out bunkers, buildings, mine positions, you name it. This operation could take weeks. We've seen this happen before with other cities. We've seen a little bit of Russia's made a little bit of progress here. Not much here. A little bit here. But only a foothold on the outskirts of Mariupol. Airstrikes on other areas. Assaults on the positions at Orkiv. Probably only probing attacks. A little bit of fighting here on the road to Zaporizhzhia. And as you can see, the Russians have established a foothold in the area. Now, there have been multiple attempts at drone strikes on Russia today. And as you see, there were airstrikes on Odessa. And there was a ballistic missile reported in the region. Though no footage. No footage. And there are actually two of the same reports, though I suspect this is out of place and that there was one report of a missile launch, probably south, airborne, and it struck Odessa. Now, the ship's reportedly damaged by sea drones called Sea Baby of the British Special Boat Service. Ukrainian Navy. Now, they hit two Russian tankers. This is yesterday, but they've released the footage today. Yesterday, they only released stills. Now, the stills have made their way around the media, but not the drone footage from the boats. See here, there was a strike. The boat exploded. Now, it appears to be totally packed with two charges, where it has the primary detonation and then that on impact, and then the secondary detonation. All right, so you have the primary detonation on impact, and then you have the main charge going off. Not much else of consequence has happened. There's war of words, drone strikes from each other, publicity photos, nothing to indicate where Zelensky stands. The Western media is focusing on drones, missiles. Trump is Trump this and Trump that. Trump's Putin's puppet. All the usual snark, disinformation. The campaign to basically disenfranchise the West continues. But, ironically, a Kyiv delegation has arrived in the United States to take steps to define the resolution that they seek to the Ukrainian conflict. That Zelensky says that steps will be made to end the conflict. Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner will meet the Ukrainian delegation in Florida tomorrow. Now, this will be ahead. Well, Witkoff is supposed to meet with Putin, but that is... No, not Witkoff, sorry. This will be at the same time. Who's the other one? Kellogg's, I think, is meeting with Putin. Or his spokesperson. It really hasn't been defined what this meeting is about, but I'm pretty sure it's a update. So it'll be a follow-up to the meeting to formally present, I suppose, what Russia already knows. The 28-point plan has been reduced to 26 points. Zelensky's going to lay out the steps that is to be taken, and Russia has not made any responses or any statements otherwise or to the contrary yet. You never know. This is the problem. Step by step, you have to take it with a grain of salt that Russia will respond negative if Ukraine doesn't accept several key points. And I think you all know what they are, but just as a reminder, no NATO, no missiles, disband several brigades, accept the reality on the battlefield that every inch you've lost is Russian territory, and stop the de-Russification of Ukrainian history. There is no Ukrainian history, without Russian history. And it's a unique and terrible situation to be in because, quite frankly, Russia pulled their cans collectively out of the fire, and now they want to basically relive some glory days of Ukraine that didn't exist. Right? The history after the Russian Revolution and the Ukrainian Revolution and the multiple Ukrainian purges, allegedly which Ukrainian Jews like Zelensky's father took part in slaughtering 10 million Christians, although that number is disputed. But ultimately, during the period of the Soviet Union, there were millions killed, and Ukraine wants to erase that history. They want to talk about the Red Terror as the Russian terror. But the Red Terror emerged out of Ukraine, just like most of the revolutions of Europe were spread by people from Eastern Europe. The Paris Collective, the Berlin Anarchy uprisings. There have been so many, most of which people, there's just too many to count. Most people aren't interested in history anymore, but Russia is at least angry to an extent that other countries are not about the erasure of history. You cannot deny, and just like Russia should not deny, that in World War II, right, Ukraine fought for the Nazis. They were defeated. And yes, Stalin illegally occupied Eastern Europe. That also should be part of history. It also should be part of history that there would be no war if it wasn't for the plethora of arms and munitions poured into Russia, first by Germany, then by America. It is such a complicated history that really removing one piece, it's like a Jenga tower. It will eventually collapse. And I think that's the point. These men don't care. They think they can rewrite history and create this glorious Ukrainian state. You can't make people today happy by giving them a false past. It's pretty much whitewashing history. Now, I hope that Zelensky's plan does not involve blowing up Russian oil, but it appears right now that is Zelensky's plan. But this could backfire on Ukraine because they've attacked an international terminal that serves the economic and political interests of multiple countries and is not solely Russian. This is Kazakhstan's oil terminal. It's only 80%, but still, that's a huge chunk of Kazakhstan's oil. It may be Russian owned, but it's not Russian oil. But then Ukraine has not claimed responsibility. But Ukrainian drones were used before, and they had attacked the consortium pumping stations. And the SBU did claim that it struck Russian oils with naval drones, similar to the drones used in this attack. But of course, as I said, I smell British intelligence, because those drones are not coming out of they're coming out of England. Keir Starmer It's not a big deal. Made a big song and dance about this drone facility. Remember the allegations of 2 Russians who set fire to the drone factory, who turned out to be Ukrainian Russians who were protesting working conditions at the drone operations. That's the second or third allegation. There were multiple allegations made, and then the whole story disappeared. Now, this pipeline was established in 1992, is 1,500 kilometers long. It links oil fields in Kazakhstan. It's huge, 63 million tons. That's 70% to foreign ships. This is not a sanctioned port. As far as anybody could know, this is the Caspian Sea pipeline consortium, not Vostok or Rostov. This is probably why Ukraine hasn't claimed responsibility, where yet it's their drones. I mean, it's their drones they got from Britain. But now, the sole voice of reason for a long time has been Viktor Orban. Right now, we have wishy-washy Donald Tusk, who doesn't seem to know what position he wants or is on. But then he says, I stand with Poland. Well, and then Poland stands with Ukraine. And then, we stand with... Then when Polish farmers are angry at him, he takes a back step and says, I'll still protect you from, from substandard Ukrainian... Just because I stand with Ukraine doesn't mean I'll put up with their substandard grain. But that's a very generic open statement. It looks like the EU's been able to get to Tusk and others, but they haven't been able to get to Orban. Orban says he's his own man. The EU doesn't control him. The EU cannot say who he meets with or where he goes. The EU has overstepped its authority and now wants to crack down on what Hungary can and can't do when it comes to foreign affairs. They want this... They keep talking about a unified front. In other words, they want to do away with national governments and national interests and make everything the interests of Brussels and Ursula always lying. And of course, this upsets a lot of people because they don't want the truth. They want comfortable lies. But the Hungarian Prime Minister is not the only one. Several NATO generals all stepped forward and said that NATO, extending NATO's eastern border to the Russian border, is not putting Moscow in danger. It's putting Paris and Brussels in danger because it is angering Russia. Russia knows, right? Russia wanted Ukraine as a buffer state. Russia, most people don't want to seem to accept this, but Russia, throughout the Cold War, Stalin always said, I have to project strength, otherwise they would invade. He said he couldn't trust the Americans to hold back the British. That the British would try to start a war in Eastern Europe, whatever. But when one of his generals called Britain a paper tiger, that it was America who won the war and it was America that Russia should deal with, Stalin purged a lot of people. But ultimately, a lot of the people Stalin purged were right. Though Stalin was afraid that the British would start a war. A buffer state that it once was. Now, Ukraine has not prospered, right? That is not the fault of Europe. That is the fault of Ukraine. They chose the easy path. Ukraine has failed on a moral, economic, and they now want a prestige. They want some prestige. Well, if they want prestige, how about returning to being the best farmers in Europe? You had the best soil. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why it's the best soil is because so many died in its fields. But unless you keep up that blood and bone, which I don't recommend you do with war, I recommend you do through natural organic means. Ukraine could be one of the biggest organic grain farmers in the world, and that would be highly profitable for Ukraine. And Ukraine used to be the largest provider of labour to Russia, Belarus, Poland, Romania. They screwed that by killing them off. Yet all these people who claim to love Ukraine, here's the thing. Millions who had Ukraine flags in their bio, you should have gone to Ukraine. The war would have been over in a year. Ukraine would have held its lines and not lost 1 inch of territory. Probably would have ended quite peacefully after a year. See, that is the true price of liberal virtue signalling. You make others do the heavy lifting for you, and then you walk away when everything goes to shit, and then you snipe crudely and from the sidelines, making constant criticisms because nothing lives up to your standards. You know who you are? You're Goldilocks. You're the rude little girl who broke into the bear's home. You're the rude little girl who ate all the bear's food. You're the rude little girl who slept in, peed in, and messed up their beds, and then ran away when they confronted you. You are Goldilocks, and you think you're the hero of the story. 'Cause it's about me, it must be, right? No, Goldilocks is the villain origin story of Karen. So, thank you for all the memes, but you can't meme. You are the meme. That's the problem. You're being mean, you're being nasty, but in reality, the truth is hurting you. You're crying. You know you're wrong. You know Orban is right. You know Putin is right. You know Zelensky has not always been wrong. And you know Britain's a mess. You know Germany's a mess. You know France a mess. But you would rather blame capitalism than yourself. You're the ones in power in England. You're the ones who have all the power in Germany. You're the ones who had all the power in France. So you cannot blame capitalism. You cannot blame Russia. It is all on you and the EU. Goldilocks. Russia is not having an easy time or a good time, but Ukraine is being systematically destroyed, and Russian forces are cracking through. Cheap little drones like that. The Ukrainians have no air defenses for short-range, small drones. And that's why there are hundreds reported every day, but they only do single damage to a bang. A $300 drone with a 2 or a 1.2 kilogram plastic explosive could set off an ammunition bunker, an artillery piece, an air defense unit. Now, yesterday, Ukraine said, well, we blew up 2 Russian air defense units. Yeah, Russia loses one every few days. 2 in one day, that is a significant strike. But you've got to also remember at the same time, Russia's destroying dozens of Ukrainian equipment every day. And the West doesn't report it. And those who follow the war don't want to hear, don't want to see, don't want to know. But it's not the only one. Every day, Ukrainian forward positions are sniped by helicopter drones, or quadcopter drones to be precise, and they as soon as there's interference, they just fall on the target. They fly over the target, they get jammed and they fall on it. And see, some don't make it, some do. They find the Ukrainians in the deep bush, in their bunkers, and they root them out. This is outside of Chasiv. As you can see, they fly in, find the bunker, nested in the trees. And your average quadcopter, about $300 wholesale out of China. China is selling drones to both Ukraine and Russia. There are not all of them are Russian made. There are some Russian made, like the Lancet, but the quadcopter is a Chinese. Don't know. There's a Lancet in this. No, I don't think so. Usually the Lancet. Oh yes, this one. It's called the Lancet because it has a long nose. This is your most basic of basic impact fuses. Basically, copper coil, both charged. As soon as they connect, the circuit is complete, and the explosive in the tube is the detonator, and it's poked into the. Usually on impact, it's going to be poked deeper into the brick, as they call it, the chunk of plastic. Now, this plastic, I know, isn't as strong or as powerful as American C4. I think it's a rudimentary form of RDX, but it's enough, right? A 3 kilogram. You think a 3 kilogram satchel charge is enough to kill most tanks? I say most, because it also does depend where you hit. The Abrams is a bit more protected than most. The Abrams is known as a 3-hit tank. It's got a bit of punch. It could take a few heavy hits, but usually, if it gets punched, it punches back as it withdraws. But there has been a few, but none of them have been taken out by drones. They've been tracked by drones. I think that is the big where tanks are, or any vehicle. It's wheels. It's the same if you with aircraft, hit the engine, Although there was the A4, I think the A4 has been one of the more successful ones. Now, we haven't heard anything from the F-16s again. Most of them are flying patrols to try and deal with drones and missiles. But Ukraine is slowly coming apart at the seams. But as the Institute of War said, it's not imminent danger. That doesn't mean no danger of collapse. But there's the Black Sea. There. Does it show where the Ukrainian drone attack took place? There's Kazakhstan. So somewhere up here, somehow, a drone was slipped through either by truck somewhere or aircraft deployed, parachuted into the sea. But it is not. It is well past the time that the West decided that war zones should be confided to the war zone. People, of course, are very upset, with the situation. But again, if you really wanted it to end, you could have ended it. But collectively, most people did nothing. They didn't want to be told. They did not want to hear. And they would not speak of the horrors of Ukraine since 2014. And that it is this liberal virtue signalling of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, that has caused Ukraine the most damage. Because when you lie and provide cover for the liars and propaganda, even if your intention is, I didn't want Russia to know. How do you know Russia doesn't know? Okay, it's clear, right, that you are one person. All these individuals somehow think, Russia won't watch CNN. Well, that's probably right, but Russia does not rely on news services for its intelligence. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with these people in general? They're always making assumptions. They never want to learn. They don't want to hear. They want to see. They never want to learn. And yet at the same time, they want to mold the world to their thinking. The most fundamental, right, of human survival. Because if you cannot deal with the truth, if you cannot accept reality, you will doom yourself. You're walking, you're baby walking yourself into oblivion, because you're gonna one day be confronted with vat-grown meat, and you're just gonna go, no, there's nothing wrong with it. Well, if there's nothing wrong with it, then why don't you eat it? And that's the reality. Deep down, they know there's something wrong, and they won't face it. They have nothing but contempt for you. They don't want to tell the truth. But the truth is, my friends, liberals have nothing but contempt for you. They lie to you. They may lie to themselves. They may lie to each other. But I think deep down, they just don't want to speak the truth because they don't want to be ostracized from the group. So the group's all lying to each other and nodding along with the party. But the party doesn't pay the bills. The party won't bail you out. It'll only bail itself out. See, people suck at these people. Truly, deep down, liberalism is nothing but sycophants. Crumbs from the table. But they're the ones in charge. You cannot blame Russia for Ukraine. You cannot blame... all the blame for Ukraine belongs with England, Germany and France. The EU. But now that seems the rest of the EU, seems Poland wants their war, and again, they went to the border and found that Belarus was putting up a wall. not. And that, yeah. There was going to be no invasion from Russia or Belarus. And nobody seems to want to acknowledge they're wrong. And of course they have all sorts of cope. But I appreciate each and every one of you. So please support the channel. You can support the channel on Ko-Fi, Patreon, buy my books, buy my merch. All my links are in the link tree, description below, in my profile, or scan the QR code on the screen. I appreciate each and every one of you. See you in the next video, and bye for now.